I used to be someone. Before I was Mrs. Weston, I was Claire Barnes, graphic designer, travel junkie, the girl with a sketchbook always tucked under her arm and dreams that stretched wider than the map on my bedroom wall. I had a job I loved, a studio apartment that smelled like coffee and paint, and a passport with more stamps than blank pages. Then I met Jonathan Weston. He was older. Refined. Magnetic. The kind of man who made you feel like the most important person in the room, simply by looking at you. And when he said he wanted to build a life with me, I believed him. I gave up my job. I gave up my independence. I gave up my name. I became his wife. The first year was magic. He whisked me away to Tuscany for our honeymoon. Bought us a townhouse in a quiet, expensive neighborhood. Told me I didn't need to work, that I had earned the right to rest. "You're my partner," he'd say, brushing a kiss across my temple. "Let me take care of you." It felt like a fairy tale. I told myself that giving up my career wasn't sacrifice, it was evolution. I wasn't just Claire anymore. I was us. But fairy tales don't mention what happens when the castle becomes a cage. By year 5, the light in his eyes when he looked at me had dimmed. He spent more time at the office. Business trips grew longer. When he did come home, he was distracted, irritated, easily bored. He stopped asking about my day. He stopped noticing me. And I faded. No more art. No more travel. Just dinner menus, dry cleaning lists, and trying not to look too tired when he came through the door. I convinced myself it was just a phase. After all, I was 39. We'd been married 10 years. Life gets dull, right? So I dyed my hair. Learned to make his favorite dishes. Got Botox for the faint lines near my mouth. But none of it worked. The night everything changed, I was waiting for him to come home from yet another client dinner. He walked in past 10, loosened his tie, and said casually, "Claire, we need to talk." Those 4 words should have warned me. But I didn't see it coming. "I'm leaving," he said, without flinching. I blinked. "What?" He sighed like it was exhausting to explain. "It's not working anymore." "What's not working?" I whispered. "This," he motioned to the air between us. "Us." I laughed, a broken, disbelieving sound. "Because of what?" "We're going through a rough patch." He looked at me then, for the first time in months, really looked. And what he said next shattered something deep inside me. "You're not the woman I married." My voice cracked. "What does that mean?" He didn't say it outright. But I saw it in his eyes. The pity. The boredom. The coldness. I wasn't young anymore. The next morning, he was gone. Just like that. He left me a note about dividing the assets and a contact for his lawyer. No apology. No explanation. Just instructions. Like I was an assistant he was dismissing. I stood in the middle of our kitchen, surrounded by things we picked out together, the espresso machine he never learned to use, the backsplash I spent weeks choosing, and realized I had nothing. No job. No income. No identity. I had given him everything. And he walked away because I'd aged. But grief didn't hit me the way I thought it would. It didn't come as tears. It came as silence. 3 days after he left, I looked in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. So I picked up my old sketchbook, buried under dust in the guest room closet. And I drew. Not a house. Not a ring. Not him. I drew me, the girl I used to be, standing at a fork in the road. And for the first time in 10 years, I realized. I still had a choice. I didn't cry when I signed the divorce papers. I didn't scream, didn't beg, didn't ask for one last explanation. I simply walked into that sterile office, nodded at Jonathan across the table, and wrote my name in ink, the last time I would ever do so as Claire Weston. It was a short name, clean and elegant. But the ink bled like blood on the page. When I walked out of the lawyer's office, the sky was gray, the kind that looks like it's constantly deciding whether to rain. I didn't go home. I didn't have one anymore. Oh, the townhouse was still technically mine for another 3 months, part of the agreement Jonathan made to make himself feel generous. But I didn't belong there. Every corner whispered his name. So I went somewhere else. Somewhere older than the townhouse, older than the marriage. Somewhere that still remembered me, my aunt's little cabin by the lake, 2 hours north. It was cold and dusty and smelled like pine and history. But it was quiet. And for the first time in years, I wasn't surrounded by silence that felt like punishment. This silence felt like possibility. I spent the first week sleeping too long, eating too little, and sketching. Sketching everything. The trees. The broken railing on the dock. The scar on my right ankle from when I fell off a bike as a kid. My face, with the lines Jonathan called stress, but that I now knew were strength. And slowly, something shifted. I started posting some of my work online. Not for likes or comments, just to exist. But then, a message arrived in my inbox. Hey Claire. This is Emily from Indigo Press. Are you taking commissions? We saw your illustrations and love the tone, raw, emotional, very real. I blinked. Indigo Press. A boutique publishing house I used to dream of working with back when I thought I'd be a full-time illustrator. I reread the message 3 times, then replied with shaking hands. Yes. I'm available. Just like that, the door creaked open again. 2 days later, I was in town buying supplies when I saw him. Jonathan. With her. She looked like me. If you took a scalpel to my past and peeled away a decade. Young. Blonde. Fresh-faced. Wearing heels too high for the sidewalk and clinging to his arm like a trophy. He looked down at her the way he used to look at me, like she was the center of every room. My heart didn't break. It flared. Not with jealousy. But clarity. I wasn't less because time had passed. He was less because he couldn't walk with someone who grew. That night, I drew again, something new. It was a woman standing in front of a shattered mirror, her reflection fractured into versions of herself, child, dreamer, lover, wife, and, finally, warrior. I posted it with a simple caption, "Every piece is still mine." It went viral. Thousands of shares. Comments from women across the globe. Stories of heartbreak. Resilience. Rebirth. And in that moment, I realized something. The world had told me to disappear after 35. But I was just getting started. The next morning, Indigo Press offered me a book deal. They wanted to compile my sketches, my captions, and the story I was silently telling, not as a pity memoir, but as a portrait of reclamation. I said yes. And then I packed up the lake house, drove back to the city, and walked past the townhouse without stopping. I didn't need to knock. That life was over. Back in the city, I signed a lease on a modest apartment above a bakery. It wasn't fancy. The elevator creaked, the walls needed painting. But the light in the art room was perfect, and when I opened the windows at night, I could hear people living. Laughing. Moving on. Like I was. I changed my name back to Claire Barnes. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I was losing anything. I felt like I was returning. I didn't expect to see him again. Not really. After the run-in on the sidewalk with the girl he replaced me with, I figured Jonathan Weston had ridden me off the same way he had walked out, like I was an outdated edition of a book he once liked but outgrew. But ghosts don't stay buried forever. Especially when you become visible again. 3 weeks after my post went viral, I got an email. Subject line, "We need to talk." Sender, Jonathan Weston. My finger hovered over the delete key. But curiosity, or maybe a flicker of defiance, made me open it. Claire. I saw your drawing. I don't know what to say other than. I didn't expect it to hit me the way it did. Could we talk? One coffee. One conversation. You owe me nothing. But I owe you a lot. Jonathan. I stared at the screen for a long time. He owed me a lot. He owed me a decade. He owed me the version of myself I buried so he could shine. But I didn't want revenge. I wanted freedom. We met at a quiet corner cafe near the park, the kind we used to go to before life became polished and planned. He looked older. Not the charming, suited-up man I remembered, but tired. The kind of tired that goes beyond sleep, the kind that lingers in the soul. I wore no makeup. My hair in a ponytail. Paint still on my hands from that morning's work. And he looked at me the way he hadn't in years, like he saw me. Claire, he said, standing awkwardly. You look like me? I offered. He smiled, not his usual smug grin. A softer one. Yeah. Better than I remember. Saturday, so? What did you want to say? He hesitated. Then, I made a mistake. I laughed, short and sharp. You'll have to narrow it down. He winced. Leaving you. The way I did. Everything. I thought I wanted something easier. Simpler. You mean younger, I said flatly. He flinched. I didn't mean for it to sound like that. But yes. Someone with fewer expectations. Fewer demands. And fewer lines on her face, I added. He didn't deny it. Instead, he leaned forward, elbows on the table. But she didn't understand me. Not really. She liked the version of me I pretended to be. I stared at him. And I loved the version of you I believed in. He said nothing. I continued, you didn't break my heart, Jonathan. You broke the illusion I built around you. And once it cracked, I saw what was underneath. And I'm glad it shattered. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small package. A leather-bound notebook. My gift, he said. It's blank. Thought maybe you could fill it with something better than what we had. I took it, ran my fingers over the cover. I already am. When I left that cafe, I didn't look back. Not out of pride. But because I no longer needed anything behind me to define what was ahead. Back at my studio, the pages of the notebook stared at me, clean, crisp, expectant. I wrote one sentence on the first page. You will not shrink to make anyone more comfortable ever again. That week, my publisher offered to make the book more than just illustrations and quotes. They wanted my story. The full truth, heartbreak, aging, rage, healing. I hesitated. Then I said yes. I called it The Years I Wasn't Seen. And the cover? A woman's face in fragments. Lines, age, resilience, lit from within. Months later, the book launched. It didn't just sell. It roared. Bookstores featured it in their windows. Women posted pictures of themselves holding it with captions like, He left when I got sick. She said I wasn't exciting anymore. He called me too much after 10 years of giving him everything. And the one that brought tears to my eyes. Thank you, Claire. You helped me walk away from someone who only loved my youth, not my soul. One morning, I got a text from an unknown number. You told the story I was too afraid to tell. Thank you. M. Margaret. Jonathan's mother. She had once looked me up and down and warned, make sure you stay interesting, Claire. Men get restless. I guess some ghosts try to redeem themselves too. I stood on the balcony of my new place, small, sunlit, with a view of the city's heartbeat, and breathed in deeply. I was 41. Alone. But not lonely. I had my voice. My art. And finally, myself. The emails never stopped. They came from women in their 30s, 40s, 60s, mothers, CEOs, caretakers, artists. Some were fresh out of heartbreak, others deep in the thick of years-long silence. A few simply wrote to say, "Thank you for reminding me I still matter." I replied to as many as I could. Because every letter, every line, reminded me that this story, my story, wasn't just mine anymore. It belonged to all of us who had been discarded when we no longer fit someone else's fantasy. A month after the Years I Wasn't Seen hit its 5th printing, I was invited to speak at a literary conference in Seattle. The kind of event I used to only attend in dreams, with name badges, panel discussions, and rooms full of strangers leaning forward when you opened your mouth. When I took the stage, the spotlight didn't scare me. It welcomed me. I stood at the podium, clutching a note card I never ended up using, and said, "For years, I made myself smaller to fit into someone else's image of love. I folded up my ambition, painted over my opinions, and called it sacrifice. But love that asks you to disappear isn't love. It's ownership dressed as devotion. And I am not anyone's property." The applause shook the floor. But it was the silence that came after, the long, standing silence, that told me everything had changed. That night, in the lobby, a man approached me. Not Jonathan. Someone new. "Excuse me," he said with a gentle smile. "I know you've probably heard this 100 times today, but that speech hit me hard." He was tall. Clean-shaven. A warm kind of tired around the eyes, not the worn-out kind, the kind that said he'd lived. "I'm Matthew," he added. "I lost my wife 3 years ago. Cancer." She used to say the same thing, that growing older made her invisible. But not to me. My throat tightened. "I think," he continued, "she would have loved your book." We talked for nearly 2 hours in the lobby. No pretenses. No flirtation laced with hidden motives. Just two people who had weathered storms, and weren't afraid to talk about the wreckage. Before we parted, he handed me a small card. Not a business card. A note. People who survive storms often build the strongest homes. If you ever want to build something, even a conversation, here's my number. I tucked it into my notebook without promising anything. But the smile lingered. Back in the city, something in me shifted. Not because of Matthew. Because of me. I no longer hesitated before speaking. I wore what I liked, even if it showed the lines on my neck or the softness of my waist. I walked into meetings, interviews, and bookstores not with pride, but with presence. And it was enough. For the first time in years, I was enough. One day, while organizing my studio, I found something I hadn't touched in years, a sealed box marked, "Claire's Dreams, open someday." Inside were old sketches, childhood journals, a list of places I wanted to visit, and a folded piece of paper from 2007 titled, "My 10-Year Vision." Publish a book. Speak to an audience. Fall in love with someone who loves me back. Travel solo to a place I've never been. Own something I built from scratch. Tears stung my eyes. Because I had done most of it. Even the love part, because I was learning to love me. A few weeks later, I did something impulsive. I booked a ticket to Lisbon. Alone. Not to run from anything, but to meet myself there. I packed light, sketchbooks, pens, a few changes of clothes, and that leather-bound notebook Jonathan once gave me, still nearly empty. But this time, I wasn't carrying old pain into a new place. I was bringing power. On my 3rd night in Lisbon, while sketching the harbor, my phone lit up. It was Matthew. "I heard there's a beautiful bookstore tucked behind a yellow church near where you're staying. Go. You'll love it. M." I smiled. Then I went. The yellow church was quiet. Its sun-washed walls curved around narrow cobbled streets, the kind that seemed pulled straight from a memory, or maybe a dream. And tucked behind it, just as Matthew had said, was a small bookshop. No sign. No glossy windows. Just a heavy wooden door, and the faint scent of lavender and old pages drifting out whenever it creaked open. I stepped inside. There were no crowds. No loud voices. Just the whisper of fingers on paper, the distant hum of an old radio playing a song I didn't know but somehow recognized. And there, near the back shelf, was a copy of The Years I Wasn't Seen, translated into Portuguese, my name printed in elegant serif below a cover that felt like a mirror. I stood there, frozen. Not because of the book. But because a woman, maybe late 50s, hair streaked silver, face soft with time, picked it up, turned it over, and smiled. I read the English version, she said without looking at me. It saved me. She didn't know who I was. And that made it mean more. That night, I walked to the edge of the city, where the river meets the sky, and sat on a bench overlooking the water. I pulled out the notebook Jonathan gave me. It had traveled through storms, grief, silence, and here it was, still blank. I opened it. And I began to write. This life is mine. Not because someone gave it to me, but because I fought for it when no one else would. Not because it looks perfect, but because it's real. Because every scar, every line, every moment that tried to erase me, carved me into something sharper, stronger, and more beautiful than I ever planned to be. When I got back to the apartment I rented for the month, there was an email waiting. Subject, an offer from TED. They wanted me to speak. Not just about the book, about aging, about visibility, about how the world discards women after a certain number, and how we are rewriting that story. I said yes. And I didn't doubt myself for even a second. I kept traveling after Lisbon. Paris. Buenos Aires. Kyoto. Not because I was running from something, but because I was finally going toward everything I had once buried. My second book came out the following year. The Life I Chose. It was louder. Braver. Less polished. It was me. And it reached even more people. But the biggest change? I fell in love again. Not with Matthew, though we did meet again, share dinners, laughter, long walks where nothing needed to be said. Not with a man. Not with a role. I fell in love with the life I built from the rubble they left me in. At 42, I stood on a TED stage, looking into the eyes of thousands, and said. They said I was too old to matter. They left when my skin changed, when my hair lost its shine. But I've never glowed more than I do now, because I see myself clearly. And no one can take that from me. Backstage, Matthew waited. He didn't ask for anything. Just smiled, handed me a bouquet of wildflowers, the same kind I once painted after Jonathan left, and said. Still glowing. I grinned. Still growing. I'm not young anymore. But I am visible. I am loved. And most importantly, I am mine.